Music theory with OneNote. Scale notes derived by interval or modal distance. Get ready and some coffee because although we're just playing with one note, it's a beautiful note. Not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1334, OneNote Scale Notes Derived by Interval or Modal Distance. List of presentations that we plan on adding plenty more to shortly. Also noting in this OneNote presentation, we spend all of our time on music theory, but we have another similarly numbered and named presentation where we actually build these tables in Excel, practicing Excel music and table visualization skills all at the same time. In prior presentations, we've been mapping out the intervals for all of the different modes, comparing and contrasting them. This time, we're going to use that information to actually map out the notes and visualize them on the fretboard, not only for the collection of notes that we keep on working in, those 7 notes around the key of C, but also for different collections of notes so we can move a little bit more around the fretboard. So what have we done in prior presentations? We've got our list of notes, 12 notes. We have listed them by letter and number. We have typically been working in the key of C, 7 notes around that. How do we derive those? We use our formula from C. We go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That gives us our collection of 7 notes. We then listed out all the intervals, noting that if we're going in the clockwise direction and there are only 12 notes, if I start from a C, I can only go a distance clockwise, or in this way down, in the way it's been set up here, 11 steps, or 12 if you include the one we are on. We have then listed the names for those 7 steps, which basically have 2 units of measurement in them, even though we don't always say one of them, that being the notes. That's the first number that most people just kind of drop off. And then the second number is going to be the scale degree, which is actually off by 1. That's the distance up from the note that we're on. And the third measurement is this M, which is basically comparing that interval to the major scale, but that's kind of, you don't really need that. I would actually recommend that you don't see that as a major information giving thing, because if you add the 4, you don't need the M. Also note, we want to go in the counterclockwise direction. So we listed out all of the names going counterclockwise, which is messy because the scale degrees fall apart counterclockwise, which we discussed in prior presentations. We then listed out all of our modes from the Ionian, Dorian, Lydian, and so on and so forth, because the modes have the same intervals for all 12 collections of 7 notes. So this generically will work for all of our collections of 7 notes through all of the modes in all of those collections of 7 notes. So now we're going to take this information to actually map out the note names so we can see the note names on our fretboard. But how did we do these? We have the scale degrees, we have the Ionian node. What we're going to do, usually we start going forward. So if I'm going to measure or build my notes around an Ionian node, which could be any of the 12 notes, which I'm going to label as an Ionian, scale from it, then I can measure from the Ionian and then everything around it. An II, an ID, an IP modal range, an IY modal range, Ionian to Lydian, an Ionian to mixed Lydian, Ionian to Aeolian, Ionian to Locrian. That's going to be a 1-1 from a numbering standpoint, like a natural number system, a 1-2 modal range, a 1-3 modal range, and so on. So in other words, to go up, for example, 3 note half steps, which would be the 4th scale degree, it's going to take us 5 note. It's going to take us 5 note half steps to get up there. So we call that then a 5 note away perfect 4th. Most people don't say 5 note away, they just say perfect 4th, but you'd want to know that it's 5 note away, and then you could drop the P because it's not really giving you any more information if you say it's a 5 note away 4th. Or I'd rather call it a 5 note away from the Ionian node 3rd modal half step. Notice that neither of these terms actually tell you the note that you're on. This one tells you the relative position within the scale, which is the Ionian. And then when we go in the counterclockwise direction, which most people don't understand that much because the scale degrees fall apart going counterclockwise, we can go up this way, going -1 modal half step back. That means I'm going to go I back to the Locrian, Ionian to Locrian, or a 1-7 modal range, a 1-6 modal range, a 1-5 modal range, and so on and so forth. Now remember the two ways that we can basically visualize our notes. We can do it this way as kind of like a number line. If I start from this C, for example, I can imagine it going infinitely up. This would be to the right if it was listed out like a note number line, or infinitely down if we're counting down. Or I can see it as a circle, meaning it's going to keep on repeating as we go around in a circle. So, but we also have directionality. So I could, of course, go on a note number line in the opposite direction. So you can kind of visualize it as a piano, but the piano has both directionality to the right, it has directionality to the left. We often forget about directionality to the left. Now, what about when we get to a fretboard? A fretboard seems more complex because now we have a more dimensions. You can go up, down, you can go left, right. So you can not only go left, right, but you can go up, down would be a better way to say it, possibly. So in other words, if I was to say I'm on this C, right here, then of course I can go to the right, I can go backwards. So how am I going to apply this directionality concept to a fretboard? Well, it's still basically directional. It's just that we have repeated notes because the strings are basically staggered piano layers on top of each other, right? That's one way that you could kind of think of it. So obviously, in other words, this D right here is the same as this D down below because there's usually a distance of 5 between the strings, although this one has a different distance because this fault line, these two strings, you can imagine, basically got shifted up if you continue our continent and global analogy. But in essence, what would happen then, the notes that are going up, if you look at the guitar, and this is the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, then going to the right is going to be going, this way up to the right from the note we're on, and it's also going to be going down from the note that we're on. So if we're going to use our compass analogy, meaning we're going to put the pointer of the compass on the Ionian, and we're going to build kind of like a circle around it, but it's not exactly a circle. It's going to be the shape that's going to be the collection of notes for the Ionian scale, right, that we're going to make around this pivot point. So then what happens when I go down the string? Well, notice that this note repeats over here. So as long as I'm above that, then this is still basically going up, in pitch, right? So we're going basically up in pitch going this way. And then when I go in the negative direction, what's that doing? From a note standpoint, we'd be going backwards this way, right? So everything back here would be on the negative side of the note number line as I'm measuring in the opposite direction from this note. And then if I go above it, now you can see 5 notes this way, because there's 5 notes between the string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the same note, right? So everything going on this side is going actually lower in pitch because you're going to the heavier strings as I'm going out this way, right? So that's going to be the general idea. So if you were on a piano, which is like one string, we have directionality going from a note number line perspective to the right and to the left. If you're on a guitar, you could still kind of visualize it like you're going up or down or like a note number line, but because the strings are layered, you got to imagine that when you're going clockwise around the circle or up in pitch, that's going down towards the floor on the guitar, and when you're going counterclockwise, then or lower in pitch, that's going to the left and up towards the heavier strings towards the ceiling. Okay. We're now going to take our fairly generic concept of our modes and the distances around any of the modal points, thinking of them kind of like a cookie cutter that we're going to be putting into the dough of the fretboard. But to do that, I have to know where in the dough of the fretboard we want to be applying the cookie cutter. We can imagine then our analogy of the fretboards being similar to the planet. It's basically rotating around, has 12 degrees of rotation. We have to choose one of those 12 degrees of rotation, in other words, one of the notes, to assign as a nodal point, as a basis or a point from which we can apply the cookie cutter shape to. We're going to start with the most familiar, that being the collection of 7 notes around the C major. So in other words, I'm going to make the C note the Ionian, and then I'm going to apply the cookie cutter of the shape that we can derive from modal distances or intervals onto that C note. Then we can measure that cookie cutter shape that we put on it by looking at the distances from each of the nodes to each of the other nodes, or also we can now assign that to the note name. So we can measure the distances in notes, we can measure the distances in the modal ranges that we've been working on. So we've been thinking, in other words, in a generic concept of modal ranges, which works for all 12 collections of 7 nodes. But once we put the cookie cutter on the fretboard, then of course we can use these same distances to apply to the notes that are being assigned to the node names. Okay, so let's see if this makes it. See, hopefully that makes sense. So what we're going to say is let's first build out to the right. So I'm going to go to the right and down, which means we're going to go clockwise from our modal distance concept. So if we have a scale degree, it's going to be the first scale degree. We have a modal distance of 0. Right, so that means we didn't go anywhere. So if we assign the C as the Ionian, then we didn't go anywhere. So that means that up here, we're on the perfect first, and we didn't move anywhere. Okay, nothing happened. Great. So now we're going to say we're going to go the second scale degree. The modal distance is going to be 1, meaning we're going to go 1 continent up for our continent analogy from the C note. That's going to get us to a D. Why? Because we're going to say that we went from now it's going to be an ID modal range, not a D note, but the D is the Dorian in this case. We went 1 modal half step up, which would be the second scale degree, which is 2 note half steps up. We call that a distance of a 2 note away major second. I'd rather call it a 2 note away from the Ionian node first modal half step. So if I pull up my, let's try to do a different color here. We'll make these maybe yellow. I don't know. Let's go here. So if I go 2 nodes up, we're going to be right here on that one. Now also note, if I go down to draw the circle around this, there's a fault line here. So usually there's 5 notes between the strings, but this fault line moved up. It shifted up. So it's going to be 5 notes to get up here, and then boom, boom, boom. So we get to the same. So this note, in other words, this and this are the same note. So also right here is going to be a distance of a 2 note away Ionian first modal half step or 2 note away major second. So we're measuring around that node. Now you might also say, hey, look, there's a 2 up here, as there's a Dorian up here as well. Why is that? Because that's going to be a different octave. So if I count that out, that would be 5 going this way, 10 going down, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's a 14 note away, and 14 minus 12 is 2. So it's going to go around the circle in another lap, basically an octave up. But we're measuring going to the right and over. So that's going to give me the notes, but I want to be able to see them both ways, because the better way to see it is really to be able to visualize that it's an ID modal range, because the ID modal range will always have a 2 note away distance. The C to the D will always have a 2 note away distance as well, but the C to the D will not always be in the collection of notes that I'm working on, whereas the I to the D will be on all collection of notes that we work on, because all the collection of notes will have the same parallel cookie cutter shape. Okay, so let's go to the next one, and we're going to say, okay, what if I go down to an IP modal range? That's going to be, the scale degree is 3, modal distance is 2, so that's going to bring me up to an E. Why? Because now we're going from the Ionian to the Phrygian. It's a 1-3 modal range. It's a 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree. It would be 4 notes up. So we call that a 4 note away. I use it 4 note away major 3rd, or a 4 note away from the Ionian node, 2nd modal half step. So that means we're going to go up. Let's choose like a different color. See, I'm going to run out of colors here, I think. But let's say we go up now. 1, 2 modal half steps up, which is 1, 2, 3 scale degrees. So if I start on the C, I'd rather call that an IP modal range or a 1, 3 modal range. But now that I've assigned it to the notes distance from space, right? The grid from space would now be, I can also call it a C to an E. Now, again, it would be useful to remember that a C to an E is always going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 note distance between it. But that is not always relevant to the 7-note collection that I'm working on. Whereas if I remember that the I to the P, the IP modal range, the 1, 3 modal range, is all that one's always going to work in all 12 collections of 7 notes. Now we can also do that here. So if I say the C repeats kind of over here. So if I'm going above that, I can go 1, 2 modal half steps up, 3rd scale degree. Right there. So we see there's a distance between 5, 4. If I go back this way because of, again, the kink in the tuning, or because this fault line, these 2 strings are shifted up. So the shape going down over these 2 strings is always going to be a wonky shape. So you have to keep that in mind. And obviously if we go an octave up here, we get to here. Why? Because it's 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So it's a 16 note up. 16 minus 12 is 6 minus 2, which is 4. Okay, so let's go to the next one and say we go down to this one. So now we're going to go down fourth a scale degree, 4 scale degrees, which would be 3 modal distance or 3 continents up. That's going to get us to an F. Why? It's going to get us from the Ionian to the Lydian from a modal range, which is a 1-4 modal range, because we're going up 3 modal half steps from the Ionian node, which is 1. It would be the 4th scale degree, therefore. It has note half steps of 5, which we call a 5-note away perfect 4th. I'd rather call it a 5-note away from the Ionian node 3rd modal half step, which is going to get us to the F if we assigned the Ionian to be a C. So let's go ahead and see if I can get a different color. Let's try this one. We're going to say it's going to the F. So we said that was going to be a 5-note away. So we're going to say 5 is going to be right here because the fault line is going to shift up. Or I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this way here. And then I can get to, there's another one back here for the F, because that's going to be, if I count it out, it's 5, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, right? Because these 2 notes are the same because there's a distance of 5 between the strings. So we're counting clockwise, which is going down and to the right. And so that's going to be that one. So again, I'd rather call it an IY modal range, but you could call it, obviously, a C to an F. So it would be great that if you memorize, hey, look, a C to an F has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note distance. It's a 5-note away. But again, the 5-note away, it may not be in the shape that you're working in, right? So it'd be good to memorize that distance, but it might not be as useful to you to remember that the modal range, the IY modal range, is always going to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note away distance. And that range will be in, again, all collections of 12 collections of 7 notes. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And we're going to say that we go the scale degrees of a scale degree of 5, a modal distance of 4. That's going to land us, if we start from the C, to a G, or note 11. Why? Because if I start on the I and I go up 4, I'm going to land on the Mixolydian continent. That's going to be a 1-5 modal range because we started on the Ionian, which is the 1, plus 4 gets me to the end, which is 5, would be the 5th scale degree. It's going to have a distance of 7 notes away, which we call a 7-note away perfect 5th. I'd rather call it a 7-note away from the Ionian node 4th modal half step. So in other words, let's see if I can go down here and say, is there any other colors that I can use? An orange. We have lots of colors. What are you worried about? I'm worried I'm going to run out. So I'm going to say I go 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 modal half steps up, which would be the 5th scale degree. It has a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can also do it down here, which would be 5, 6, 7. So I can count it out to here, and then I can say this is going to be 5, 10, 9, 8, 7. So notice these are all the same distance. These are basically the same notes. Now you might be like, notice we're not even talking about octaves here, because remember the strings are staggered. That's why, so we're playing kind of like the same notes on different strings. We saw an octave situation before, where this is an octave up for the Phrygian, an octave up. But on the guitar, you have this situation where you have the same notes, because again, you got multiple pianos kind of staggered on top of each other, if you want to visualize it that way. All right, so let's go to the next one. We're running long on time. You're babbling nonsensibly. Okay, let's go. We go up a scale degree of 6. Modal distance would be 5 continents up from the C. That's going to land us on an A. Why? Because if I go an Ionian, which is the 1, and I go up 5 continents or 5 modal half steps, it's going to land us on the Aeolian continent, which is the 6. 1 plus 5 is 6. That's going to be the 6th scale degree, 9 note half steps, which we call a 9 note away major 6. I'd rather call it a 9 note away from the Ionian node, 5th modal half step. So we're going to say, let's go here and say, is there another color like this one? Looks similar, doesn't it? Looks similar to what we did. Let's do a red. Red looks like, let's do this one. So now we're going to say it's 9 notes away. So that's going to be 5, 10, 9. So here's one way that we can count it out here. I can't go 9 up because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I could go 5 to here, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's one right there. So we have going that way. And so there we have that. So see how we're building the circle around it here. So now I'm going to say, all right, let's go to the next one finally. And we're going to say that we have a 7 scale degrees, which is a modal distance of 6. If we start on the C, that's going to land us on a B. Why? Because if I go from the Ionian up 6 continents, that's going to land me on the Locrian continent, because the Ionian is 1 plus 6 gets me to the 7. 1, 7 modal range. Scale degrees are 7. It has note half steps of 11. That's an 11 note away major 7. I'd rather call it an 11 note away from the Ionian node, 6 modal half step. Okay, so let's see. I'm getting into the weird colors now. Let's make that this color. I should use like a gray. Why don't I anyway. If we go 11 up, it's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's one here. And then 5, 10, 11. There's one there. So you can see how we're building the compass. We put the compass point here. But what about going the other way? No one goes the other way. But we should be able to build the other way, because that's how you build like chords. This is basically, if you played all these together, you can call that a certain chord. We'll talk about chords later, but I want to be able to name the shape, right? So if I go up the other way, what if I go the 2nd scale degree, negative 2nd scale degree? We don't usually have negative scale degrees. That's a problem. But if I use modal distance, it makes more sense. Negative 1 continent in the opposite direction if I start on the C as the midpoint. Well, that's going to give us if I go 1 back from the Ionian, and there's only 7 nodes, I'm going to go back to 7. It's going to land me on the Locrian. It's going to be a 1-7 modal range and Ionian Locrian modal range. It'll be 1 modal half step back, which would be the 2nd scale degree if we had those, which would be a 1 note half step backwards. We'd call that a -1 major 7. Why? Because going forward would be an 11 note away major 7, 12 minus 1. So that means that the major 7 could be 11 forward or 1 backwards. It makes more sense to call it a -1 from the Ionian node, negative modal half step. That negative is flowing through to both of the numbers, so we don't have to repeat it. Because going forward, it would still be an 11 note away from the Ionian node. 7 minus 1, though, would be 6 modal half steps forward. So see, this one makes sense if you go clockwise or counterclockwise around the block from either of the measuring methods we use, whether it be notes or whether it be modal half steps continent, jumping continent to continent equivalent. All right, so let's say, so now we're going to go, so we went back to the Locrian. What did we use for the Locrian? That's the pink. Okay, so we're going to go back to the Locrian. If I go back 1 modal half step, boom, there's the Locrian. Okay, we can also see one up here, and so we could say, well, how did that happen? Because this note repeats up here, right? So this would be like -5. I usually think of it as a -5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or in other words, this C is the same as this C, and we get back to the Locrian. We see a Locrian up here. How is that happening? Because it's going to be -5 between the strings, -10, and then I'm going up in the negative direction, 10, 11, 12, 13. So it's 13. 13 minus 12 gets me to -1, -1 back. So these are an octave difference from each other. We see another one up here. So how do we get to that distance? If we want to count up to there, it's going to be -5, -10, -15. And now I'm going to go -15, -14, -13. 13 minus 12 notes gets me back to a 1, -1, if we think about going around the track in a circle. So that's going to be the general idea there. Let's say we go back another one. So let's say we go negative third scale degree, which we don't really have negative scale degrees. So I could call it a negative second modal half step, or 2 notes back, modal half steps back. What's that going to get us to? Well, if I'm on the Ionian, it's going to land us on the Aeolian, an AI. Why? Because from the Ionian, it's 1 minus 2. It's going to bring us back to 7 and then 6, because there's only 7 of them when we go around a circle. So that's going to be a -3 note distance in the negative direction, or counterclockwise, a -3 major 6, because going forward, 12 minus 3 would be a 9 note away major 6. So a major 6 could be 9 forward or 3 backwards. But I'd rather call it a -3 from the Ionian node, negative second modal half step. So we're going to say then that was a, from this perspective, it's going to be an A. So let's say that's going to be an A. Let's hit the drop down here and say we pick the same, see if I can get the same color. And so we're going to go backwards. So it's going to be 1, 2 continents back, or modal half steps, which would be the -3rd scale degree if you made that to 1, but we don't usually have that 3rd scale degree, distance 1, 2, 3. So again, I'd rather call it an IA modal range going in the counterclockwise or negative direction, right? So we went 1, 2, 3 steps back. So we also have then an A here, because that's going to be an octave up. If I count that up, it's going to be 5, 10, -10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 15 minus 12, that's 5 minus 2, 5, 4, 3, a distance of 3, so it's an octave difference there. And so there we have, going that way, we have an A out here. Why is that? Because we're going to say it's -5, -4, -3. It's going to be that A, and then we have an A up here, which is going to be -5, -10, -15. 15 minus 12 is 5 minus 2, 5, 4, 3. Okay, so we get to that same distance that we're measuring around this node, this Ionian. Okay, so then we're going to say, let's go to the next one down, and let's say we go 4 scale degrees back. We don't usually have scale degrees, but you could go back 3 modal half steps. Where's that going to get us? If we go back 3 from the Ionian, it's going to get us to the Mixolydian. Why? Because back 3 from the Ionian, 7, 6, 5 gets us to the 5, 1, 5 modal range going counterclockwise, has a distance of -5 notes, which we could call a -5 perfect fifth, because going forward would be 12 minus 5, or 7 note away perfect fifth. So a perfect fifth could be 7 forward or 5 backwards. I'd rather call it a -5 Ionian -3rd, because going forward it would be a 7 note away from the Ionian. 7 minus 3 would be 4, so it'd be a 7 note away Ionian 4th. So we're going to go back. That's going to get us then to the G. So let's see. Wait a sec. I didn't color. What color is the G? Oh, it's the orange. Orange. Let's do this one. Okay, so if I go 1, 2, 3, it would be 3 modal half steps back. Distance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5 notes back. If I go up 1, there's a distance between 5 between these strings. So there's another one right here. If I go 5, 10, 15, 16, -16, -17, 17 minus 12 is like 7 minus 2, 7, 6, 5. 5-note distance for that one as well. There's one out here. How do I count that one out? It's going to be -5, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, wait a sec, -5, -10, -9, -8, -7, -6, -5. So there's a 5-note distance to that G. So now we've counted around for that one. And let's say we go back then 5 scale degrees back, which would be -4 modal half steps or continents counterclockwise. So if I start on the Ionian and we go back, if we go 4 back, we'll land on the Lydian, which is a 1-4 modal range. -7 back, which we'd call a -7 perfect fourth. Why? Because going forward, 12 minus 7 is a 5-note away perfect fourth. So the perfect fourth could be 5 forward or 7 backwards. I'd rather call it a -7-note away from the Ionian node, -4th modal half step, because going forward would be a 5-note away from the Ionian node, 3rd modal half step. And that's going to get us then to, from a note standpoint, an F. So what color does the F? We made that hot pink. So we're going to say, is that this one or this one? I don't know. I think it's this one. Can't tell. So let's say we go back. Oh, now I've got the wrong pointer. It needs to be, this is the pointer. Boom. Okay, so now we're going to go back to here. So I can't go back this way because we ran out of space. So it's going to be -5, -6, -7 distance going back this way. And then I can see another one up here. Why does that work? Because it's going to be -5, -10, -15, -16, 17, 18, 19. 19 minus 12 is like 9 minus 2, 9, 8, 7. So basically, if you go around a circle, there's the distance. Here's one out here. How does that work? Because it's -5, -10, -9, 8, 7, right? So there we have those. And then let's go back on up and say, okay, what if we go down to 6 scale degrees, -5 modal half steps. So if we start on the Ionian, then that's going to, and we go down 5, that lands on the Phrygian. It would be a 1-3 modal range, -8 notes, a -8 major, because going the other way would be 12 minus 8, or a 4-note away major third. So a major third could be 4 forward or clockwise, or 8 counterclockwise or backwards. I'd rather call it a -8 note away from the Ionian node, -5th modal half step, because then going forward it would still be 4 notes away, but this time from the Ionian node, and 2 modal half steps forward. So we're going to see that that's going to be then landing us from the C to the E. So let's see what color did we have for the E. Let's say that's blue. Okay. And so we're going to go up from this one. Let's go to here. So it's going to be -5, -6, 7, 8. So a distance of -8. And if I go up to here, that's going to be an octave up. Why? Because if I say -5, -10, -15, -16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20 minus 12 would be like 10 minus 2 or 8, right? And then I have this E right here. That's going to be -5, -10, -9, -8. And then you've got an E way out here, which I won't count out, but you get the idea because we're running short on time. Let's say we go back finally 7 scale degrees back, which would be 6 modal half steps back from the Ionian node. 7 or 6 modal half steps back from the Ionian would land me in the Dorian. It would be a 1-2 modal range, -10 as a distance, and we would call that a -10 major second. Why? Because going forward would be a 2-note away major second, which would be 12 minus 10. I'd rather call it a 10-note away from the Ionian node, -6 modal half step, because going forward would be a 2-note away from the Ionian node, 1st modal half step. So we're going to get to note-wise a D if we make the C the Ionian. And let's make that yellow. It has been our color there, so let's make that yellow. Ba-boom. And so if I go -5, -10, there's a D right there. I can also go -5, -6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These two are the same note. Here's the D up there. How do I get there? -5, -10, -15, -14, 13, 12. Wait, that's a C. I was going, let me undo that. Undo -5, -10, -15, -14, 13, 12, 11, 10 going out to here. This one, of course, is the octave. So all of the C's are the octave of this green one. All right. Let's see. I was going to do this with more than one, so this took way longer than I expected, of course, which is typically the case. Let's just try to go to the Dorian. And this time, I'm going to try to look at a different collection of notes, but go around the Dorian node. Why is it popping up like this? What is happening? So let's just measure a few. This time, we're going to measure around the Dorian node, but it's going to be the collection of notes around a D Dorian. No, around the C Dorian. So I'm going to make it a C Dorian instead of the D Dorian, which means we're going to have a different collection of 7 notes that we'll measure out on this one. All right. So let's say that we're going to take now our cookie cutter, but this time instead of measuring around the Ionian, I'm going to measure around the Dorian. Now notice if I assign the Dorian as my center point, then most people are going to get a little bit confused because they're going to have to go back and say, well, if they're going to have to say, well, if the C is the Dorian, what's the Ionian? It would be an A sharp. Why? Because most people assign the 12 degrees of rotation to the collection of notes around the Ionian or major scale. But you don't have to, right? I could say, so if I say that I'm going to take the Dorian as my collection of notes, then I'm going to have to back into it, which is one of the problems with telling people from a scale standpoint that you're playing in like C Dorian or something, right? Because then they have to back into and say, okay, what collection of notes actually is that? It would be nicer to say we're doing the collection of notes around the A sharp Ionian, focusing in on the D note on the Dorian node, which would be a C. So right, because that will tell you the collection of notes and the one to focus in on. But any case, we're going to focus then on the same note, which is the C note, but now you can see that we have the cookie cutter that has been assigned to it of around the Dorian. Now note that the cookie cutter shape is basically the same full cookie cutter shape if you cut out the entire fretboard. We're just shifting the thing up, but we're measuring it around now the Dorian node. We're gonna describe the shape of the cookie cutter around this particular node of the cookie cutter, the Dorian, instead of the Ionian. So if I stay on the same point, then if we didn't move anywhere, then we're going to stay on the C and not go anywhere from the C. So that would be from a DD modal range. Let's go to the next one up and say now we're going to go up one. So we got one modal half step up, which would be the second scale degree. If we go one modal half step up from the Dorian, then we're going to land on the Phrygian. Why? Because the Dorian is the 2, and then we're going to go up to the 3. It'd be a 2-3 modal range, one modal half step up, which would be the second scale degree, which would be a note half step of 2. So we would call that once again a 2-note away major second, the same distance as we saw in the Ionian, even though we're in a minor mode this time. I'd rather call it a 2-note away from the Dorian node first modal half step. So if we make this, then we're going to say, okay, the Dorian, that C is now the Dorian, and we're going to be going up to the D. So now the D is the Phrygian. So notice you have the same distance. You could still say, hey, look, that's a 2-note away major second from the C to the D. The C to the D will always have a 2-note away distance, but it'd be better to call it now a DP modal range, because now the relationship within the context of whatever I'm playing is more important to see it as a DP modal range, a 2-3 modal range, rather than a going from the C note to the D note, because the C note is no longer the Ionian. In the context of the song, it's the Dorian, or whatever I'm doing, right? So that's going to be one modal half step up. It would be the first, yeah, one modal half step up. It would be the second scale degree if I make this the 1, and it would be 1, 2 notes up. Okay, so let's say if I go up to here, then what's that one? That's going to be, if I say this is going to be 5 notes between here because there's a kink in the tuning or the fault line shifted up. So 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 minus 12 is like 4 minus 2, which is 2. So if I go around in a circle, you can still see that that's going to be, in essence, the same distance. If I see the C is also back here, so that's 2 notes up from that C. So in other words, if I count this out, it'll be 5, 4, 3, 2. These 2 notes are, in essence, the same. All right, let's go to the next one down and say, all right, what if I go to the next one down, which would be the second modal half step up, or the third scale degree? I'm going to get to note number 7, which is going to be a D sharp. So why is that? Because we're going to say if I go from the Dorian, then I'm going to land on the Lydian mode. That's a 2-4 modal range. That's going to be then a 2 modal half steps up, third scale degree. It's going to have a note half steps of 3, which is a 3 note away minor third. I'd rather call it a 3 note away, this time from the Dorian node, second modal half step. So that's going to land us on a different note that wasn't in this collection of notes over here, because now we're measuring around the cookie cutter shape being shifted up to the Dorian, even though we're focusing around the same note. So it's going to be a, I'm going to go up another one. Let's make it like a, I don't know, a yellow. I already did. Yellow's the last one I did. Let's make it, I don't know, like this color, purple, that is. That's going to be 1, 2 modal half steps up, which are 1, 2, 3 notes up. So now we're on the D sharp note. But I'd rather call it a DY modal range, because the DY modal range will always have the same distance in all collections of notes. I can say it's going to be 5, 4, 3, so it could be back here. So once again, this is 1, 2, 3 notes up, 1, 2 modal half steps, which would be the third scale degree. So 5, 4, 3 to get to this one. And we also see it, so that's going to be that one. We see it out here, which is going to be an octave up from this one, which is going to be 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 minus 12 would be like 5 minus 2, 5, 4, 3 distance going that way. Okay, I'm going to just go the other way now, just so we get the flavor of it, so we don't take, so I can maybe get through the opposite direction. What if I went -1 scale degree, and that would be -1 modal half step going the other way? That means that if I'm going the other way, lower direction or counterclockwise, going back 1 from the Dorian, I'm going to get to the Ionian, because the Dorian is the 2, -1 gets me to the Ionian. It's a 2-1 modal range going counterclockwise, and that's going to be then first modal half step backwards. It's a distance of -2 notes, which I could call a -2 minor 7, because going forward would be 12 minus 2, which would be a 10 note away minor 7 going clockwise or forward. Therefore, backwards, -2 minor 7. I'd rather call it a -2 from the Dorian node, -1st modal half step, because going forward would still be 10 from the Dorian, but then 7 minus 1 would be 6. So this makes sense going clockwise and counterclockwise. That's going to be an A sharp that we will get to. So let's say we go up this way, and I'm going to make it like a different color. So it's going to be here. Wait a sec. Is that right? I went up. That's going to be a distance of, yeah, that's right. But I was counting from here. What am I doing? That's going to be, that's going to be, let's count it. Let's do this one first. Let's go back here first. That makes more, easier to start with. So we go 1 continent backwards, which is -1 modal half steps backwards, which would be 2 notes backwards. And that's going to get us from the Dorian to the Ionian. I would like to call it a 2-1 modal range going in the counterclockwise direction. So you see that's easier to memorize than going from the C to the A sharp, right? Because again, C to the A sharp going negative will always be -2 notes, but it's not always going to be in the same context of whatever I'm playing. If I just put the cookie cutter down around the Dorian and label the cookie color relative positions, that'll be easier for me to be able to see. It also makes it easier for me to shift and play the same thing in different keys. If I go up here, it would be -5, -4, -3, -5, -4, -3, -2, right? And so there it is back here, and I have one out here because that's an octave from this one. -5, -10, -11, 12, 13, 14. 14 minus 12 is 4 minus 2, and so that would be 2, right? So there it is there as well. Let's go to the next one and say, what if I go up another one going in the counterclockwise direction? That's going to get me to an A. So I'm going to go back then -2 modal half steps. So if I go -2 modal half steps back from the Dorian, it's going to land me on the Locrian, which would be a 2-7 modal range, back 2, which would be a distance of -3, which I'd call a -3 major 6. Why? It's a major 6 again, even though I'm in a minor mode of the Dorian, because going forward would be 12 minus 3, or 9 note away major 6. So a major 6 could be 9 forward or 3 backwards. I'd rather call it a -3 note away from the Dorian node, -2nd modal half step, because going forward would be a 9 note away from the Dorian node, and then 7 minus 2 would be 5 going forward. That's going to land us on an A. So let's go over here and say, all right, it's going to land me on an A. So I'm just going to say, let's make this some other color. I haven't used blue yet, so let's say we go to an A. So we're going to say, okay, here's one. Let's go to this one first. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's going to be 1, 2 modal half steps backwards, which is a distance of 1, 2, 3, -3 notes away. I would call it a DN modal range, or a Dorian Locrian, or a 2-7 modal range going in the counterclockwise direction. Here's one here, -5, -4, -3, right? And then, and then here's one up here, which would be -5, -10, -15. 15 minus 12 would be 5 minus 2, 5, 4, 3. So that's going to be the idea. Now again, you can memorize the distance of saying, yeah, if I go from a C back to an A, that's -3 distance. But it's not always going to be in the context of a DN, a Dorian to the Locrian, right? You'd rather say, well, I have my cookie cutter labeled here, so this is now the Dorian, and that's the Locrian, and therefore it's always going to be a DN counterclockwise will have a direction of 1, 2, 3, -3. If I go in forward, it's going to be up here. It's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 going forward, right? Because 12, total distance of 12. Let's try to do one more idea here for the next one and say, what if I was on like the Phrygian, right? So the Phrygian node. So Phrygian node, and say we go forward from the Phrygian. Let's say we go here. And so now we're on the C Phrygian. So I'll make that green again. So I'm going to say, okay, so now we're on this one. I have to delete this first. Let's get this out of here. And then I can say, okay, we're going to say now the C is the same C that we've been working on before, but now it's the Phrygian. So now I'm going to measure from that point. Now again, if you say you're playing in Phrygian, it would be nicer to say, hey, look, I'm playing in G sharp Ionian, the collection of notes around the G sharp major, but then I'm going to be focusing in on the Phrygian as the tonic, or my focal point, the center, because that'll make it easier to tell people which collection of notes, because we usually assign the collection of notes to the Ionian or major scale, and then play around one of the nodes as your focal point, right, in this case. But we can measure the scale from the distances from the Phrygian, right? So that's just another place that we're going to measure and build our cookie cutter. We have 7 points in the cookie cutter. We can build around any of the 7 points in the cookie cutter with our distances. So I'm going to say, all right, which is useful when you're building different chords. So let's say we go back. Let's say we go up one modal half step forward, which would be the second scale degree. That means if you're on the Phrygian and you go up one modal half step or one continent, you land on the Lydian. because 3 plus 1 gets you to the 4. That's a 3-4 modal range. Up 1 modal half step would be the second scale degree. Note half steps would be 1. So it's a 1 note away minor second. So this is the only one that has a minor second, or one of this one in Locrian. Not even the Dorian or the Aeolian have a 1 note away minor second, because that's that half step. So let's just pick a different color. The colors are not going to be consistent between all the shapes. I'm just going to pick yellow. So now we have a 1 note away. So it's 1 continent away, which is 1 modal half step, second scale degree if I make that the 1, and it's 1 note away as well. What about back here? That's because it's going to be 5 notes between these two, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 1 away from this one, which is the same as that there. What about up here? That's going to be 5, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 minus 12 is 1. All right, let's say we go down another one. Get this out of here. This thing is, now I put a dot on there. So I go 2 modal half steps forward. That's going to land me on a C sharp. Why? Because if I go on the Phrygian and I go up 2, then it's going to land me on the Mixolydian. From the 3 plus 2 lands me on a 5, 3, 5 modal range. Going clockwise would be the 3rd scale degree. 3 note half steps up. That would be a 3 note away minor 3rd, which I'd rather call a 3 note away from the Phrygian node 2nd modal half step. Right? So then I can choose a different color here. Let's make this orange and say now it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be 1, 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree, which would be 1, 2, 3 notes up. Okay, and then so I see that down here as well. Why? Because that's going to be the octave of this one. 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 minus 12, it's 5 minus 2, 5, 4, 3. We see 1 here. Why? Because it's going to be 5, 4, 3 to get to that one. Let's just go in the other direction and see if I go counterclockwise, negative 1 step, just to see around the circle the other way, just to get directionality. If I go from the Phrygian back 1 node, then I'm going to land on the Dorian. Why? Because if I go from 3 back to 1, I get to the 2. That's a 3-2 modal range, which is going to be 2 notes backwards. So it'd be a 2 note away, negative 2 note away, minor 7. Why? Because going forward would be 12 minus 2, or 10 note away, which is a minor 7. I'd rather call it a negative 2 note away from the Phrygian node, negative 1st modal half step, because going forward would still be 10, but from the Phrygian node, 7 minus 1 would be 6. So if I go on the Phrygian here and we go backwards, we're going to get to the AB, right? So I go backwards. Let's go to the blue, and we're going to say, okay, so we're on this one. We go back, we get to here, right? So that's going to be 1 modal half step back, which would be 2 notes back. Okay, so let's go, and we go 2 notes back. We see another one up here. Why is that? Because it's going to be negative 5, negative 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, negative 14 minus 14 minus 12 is like 4 minus 2, which is 2. And then we see another one up here. My cursor got lost. That's going to be negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, right? And let's do one more. And let's say we go back 2 modal half steps back. I'm going to get to the G sharp. Why? Because if I'm on the Phrygian node and I go back 2, I'm going to get to the Ionian, because the Phrygian is 3 minus 2 gets me to the 1, 3, 1 modal range. Going counterclockwise would be negative 2 modal half steps. It would be negative 4 notes. That's going to be a negative 4 minor 6. Why? Going forward would be the 12 minus 4, which would be an 8 note away minor 6. So the minor 6 could be 8 forward or clockwise, or negative 4 backwards or counterclockwise. I'd rather call it a negative 4 note away from the Phrygian node, negative 2nd modal half step. But in any case, it's going to land me on the G sharp. So let's make this one another color. Let's make it the hot pink. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3 going backwards. So 3 modal half steps back, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes back, right? Is that right? It's going to be, hold on a second. That's not right. It's going to be 1, 2 back, right? So we're going back 2 continents back, right? from here. 1, 2, 2 modal half steps back, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4 notes back. Okay, that makes sense. All right, and then we have this one up here, which is going to be -5, -4, going back that way. This one up here would be -5, -10, -15, -16. 16 minus 12 is 6 minus 2, which would be, once again, 4. And then we have one out here, so I won't go through all of them. But that's the general idea. So so you can see what's basically happening here. We're taking the generic cookie cutter, and we can use any of these points to build the shape, which is basically taking the same giant shape and then moving it up on the putty, on the dough of the fretboard. But we can measure the shape by the 7 points within the shape, any of the 7 points within the shape. And as you do that, hopefully you get the idea that it'd be nice to learn the distances between all of the notes. That'd be cool because they all have a fixed distance between all the notes, but it might not be as useful or practical to learn the distances that are the modal ranges going clockwise and counterclockwise, because those give you not only the distance, which is constant, but also a constant context within what it means within what you're playing, right? And in the song. So it would be great to be able to do both, but learning the distance of the modal ranges will be easier. It'll give you context, right? Whereas if you just learn a distance between two notes without any context of where it is in the song, then that distance it's not going to give you as much information. It's not going to be as useful anyway.